Hello, everyone. My name is John Temmen. I'm a master's student in the Department of Geography here at Ohio State, and I will be giving a guest lecture today about air cargo.
All right, so here is what we will be discussing today. First, the known shipper program. We're going to go over that. That's one of the first significant actions that was taken to ensure that cargo is securely moved throughout the air transportation system. Next, we're going to talk about ATSA 2001 changes. These are changes that occurred as a result of 9/11. As we all know, that's an event that changed many aspects of American life, many aspects of life globally as well, but also it profoundly affected aviation and it profoundly affected the way we transport cargo. And then we'll end by talking about the Certified Cargo Screening Program. That is an extension of ATSA 2001. They're not two separate things. CCSP, as Certified Cargo Screening Program is also known as, came as a result of ATSA 2001. So those are our three main chunks that we'll be discussing today. And then I wanted to talk first a little bit about myself. Um, how am I connected to this material? Why does this material matter to me? And it has to do with my background. So before I was a graduate student, well, before I was even an undergraduate student, I had two careers, both in aviation. The first, I was a C-130 loadmaster for the United States Air Force. I was in both the active duty and the reserve component. And so my job was handling air cargo. Basically, people would prepare cargo in a yard, they would package it, and they would bring it to me, and I would inspect it, sign off on all the paperwork, take custody of that cargo, load it onto the aircraft, calculate the weight and balance for the aircraft, and then fly with that cargo to the next air station. Also, I was a Delta Airlines flight attendant. So that's my other career in aviation. I dealt less with cargo in that career, but a lot of this will hit home because cargo security is very much entangled with passenger security. So it'll come up often about inspecting cargo that flies on passenger aircraft. And why does that matter? Well, two reasons. Obviously, one, it only takes a single unsecure parcel to jeopardize an entire passenger aircraft. So the loss of life is obviously a big threat and makes passenger aircraft targets. But also, too, people don't realize that is a huge part of our supply chain. So it's up to 50, it's not quite 50, but it's up to 50% of all cargo that flies through the air is in the belly of passenger aircraft. And that's why that matters to me. So that's a little bit about my background. That's a little bit of who I am. I've attached some pictures here. As you can see, this one is of me before my first combat airdrop. I look pretty happy. This one, we were doing some formation flying in Bulgaria. We had some Air Force public affairs on board, so I opened up the back end door, let them take a few photos. I took a photo of one of them. That one actually I'm pretty proud of. It got published in the local base magazine. And then this one is just a picture of me. I'm right here in the middle here. That's me as a Delta Airlines flight attendant standing outside of an MD-88. As a pretty junior flight attendant, you fly on those quite a bit. All right, so getting into our initial actions. The first significant action taken towards securing cargo that flew through the air. We have to go back to 1996, all right? Some of you probably weren't even born yet. It's okay. I was only like 5 years old, so whatever. The first one we're going to talk about is ValueJet Flight 592. All right. So ValueJet 592 was a DC-9, very similar to that plane that you saw me standing in front of there on the last slide. And it was departing from Miami inbound to Atlanta. It did not make it to Atlanta. There was a cargo compartment fire, and there was a total loss of crew and passengers. So what happened there? The National Transportation Security Board, NTSB, determined that SaberTech did not properly inspect or package flammable cargo. ValueJet failed to send a representative to inspect excuse me, inspect their facility, and also did not do their own inspection of the cargo once they received it. And then also they found the FAA to be at blame because there was no regulation requiring either party to do either of those things. So that's a pretty common theme in aviation. If you're looking for a career in aviation, like I'm assuming most of you are, that anytime there's an incident, a mishap, anything, there's always an investigation, there's always a cause, and there's always somebody to blame. So this has happened to me, I won't say numerous times, it's happened to me a couple times, even when things were obviously out of the crew's control. So just be prepared. If you're in aviation and something happens, there will be an investigation, there will be underlying causes identified, and someone will be to blame. So moving on. So this is the really hard-hitting one. This is the one that is mentioned in the report that we'll talk about in the next slide, is TWA Flight 800. So Trans World Airlines Flight 800 was departing from JFK. It was going to make an inbound stop at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, France, before continuing on to Leonardo da Vinci and Rome, Italy. So this is a big plane. This is a 747. It lines up, it takes off. 12 minutes after takeoff, there's an explosion in the cargo hold, and the plane crashes into the Atlantic Ocean. 230 people dead. All right. So obviously this was very unsettling for a number of reasons. One, just the loss of life alone, and then two, obviously that's a really big plane. So at first they thought that there may have been some sort of some sort of terrorist attack, or this was like an attack, or this was coordinated. Eventually that was determined not to be the case. However, that initial idea that this was an attack did have influence. And that brings us to the Gore Commission. All right, so President Al Gore was the vice president for then President Bill Clinton. After these two incidents, they decided that they needed to do something about transportation security, particularly about air transportation. So President Bill Clinton set forth to make a commission, and this was led by Vice President Al Gore. You may know Vice President Al Gore from An Inconvenient Truth. He is also a climate activist to this day, environmental activist. He was also parodied, I'll call it, on South Park as a man warning us all of the dangers of man, bear, pig. So if you're a South Park fan, maybe you get that. But anyway, so in 1996, Al Gore, this guy right here at the time, was tasked with preventing bombs and explosives from ending up in the belly of passenger aircraft. So how was he going to go about doing that? That's the big. Vice President Al Gore's commission led us to the first significant action to securing cargo for air transportation. So what happened was the known shipper program. And what this is that let's say we have this cargo plane here, and this is the headquarters for cargo airlines. What's going to happen is they are going to send a representative to a potential air carrier to inspect their facility. Once the facility has been inspected and is up to snuff with the airline's requirements, they're a known shipper. They get the designation of a known shipper, and they can then put cargo in the belly of that aircraft, and it can fly around. So this was the first significant action. And generally after this came out, it was only known carriers that were permitted to transport with air carriers. So unknown carriers, as they were then called, were still able to fly cargo on airlines. It's just that there was a more rigorous process to go through. So if it was coming from a known carrier, sometimes all that was required would be a visual inspection. However, if it was coming from an unknown carrier, it required a much more rigorous process rather. So that is the known shipper program, and it is the important first step in securing cargo for air transportation. So this next part, we're going to start on post 9/11 and ATSA 2001. If you need to take a break, I would recommend here'd be a good convenient stopping point. Get up, stretch your legs, especially important with everyone being at home right now. You get up and, walk around the apartment from time to time. So, yep, this is a good stopping point, and you can come back and start on this slide if you need to. So, post 9/11, we are introduced with a new bill. It is the Aviation Transportation Security Act of 2001. So this was, of course, like I just said, a response to 9/11. As we're all familiar, the events of September 11th, 2001 drastically changed life around the globe, right? It changed how we travel, it changed lots of things, profoundly has affected the aviation industry, and it has very much affected the supply chain and all forms of logistics, especially air cargo, what we're talking about today. So what this did was it listed a series of provisions that needed to take place, and we'll talk about the ones regarding air cargo, and even then it's a pretty extensive list. So these were rolled out between 2001 and 2006. The main focus of this bill in regards to air cargo was to prevent explosives from getting onto passenger aircraft. As we said, that's very important. Just one unsecure package could jeopardize an entire passenger aircraft. That's loss of hundreds of lives. And also we know that this is not something unlikely to happen. We know that this is about half of our air cargo supply chain. So making sure that all cargo that goes on passenger aircraft is not explosive. Also, preventing the hijacking and weaponization of all cargo aircraft is another goal that it had. So let's just go over the ATSA provisions real quick. There's quite a few, so I'll just try to work through these and give brief explanations of each. So, starting at the top, a new standard security program for aircraft weighing over 101,309.3 pounds. That is an oddly specific number. So I wish I had a great way to tell you how to remember 101,309.3 pounds, but I don't. So if it helps you any, it isn't just some obscure number, it is 45,500 kilograms. So a kilogram is roughly 2.2 pounds. Yeah, so I hope the metric system helps out a little bit there. Also, the next one, strengthening existing security measures for aircraft between 12,500 pounds and 101,309.3 pounds. So just beefing up security around that range. Expanding security screening for passengers and cargo boarding or unloading onto all cargo aircraft. So yes, this does happen from time to time. There are passengers on quote unquote all cargo aircraft. There's just, less seatings and different process for going about that. So it's making sure that screening for those passengers, this is part of that anti-hijacking that we talked about. Also, requiring IDs to be displayed in cargo operations areas. So if anyone's familiar with airport operations or has ever worked at an airport, you know there is something called a SIDA badge. So SIDA badge. This is your security badge that allows you into secure areas. It'll determine which areas of the airport you're allowed into. And basically, before ATSA 2001, It wasn't required that you had to display your badge outside of your work uniform to get into these cargo operations areas. However, because of ATSA 2001, that territory of where a SIDA badge had to be visibly displayed was expanded. It also expanded the definition of IACs, which are indirect air carriers, and indirect air carriers make up about 80% of the air transportation system. So these are basically carriers that are going to consolidate cargo and feed them into your larger cargo airlines or your larger passenger airlines. So your IACs, that definition was expanded to cover more air carriers, and then it also required them to enhance their security requirements. Also, it strengthened the foreign air carrier cargo standards. Basically, what they were looking for is just some form of reciprocity. So, in other words, is foreign air cargo carriers, are they abiding by similar security standards than what we would require of domestic carriers? Which is important, and we'll talk about it later on. Also, the TSA took over the known shipper program. So prior to ATSA 2001, what you had was largely the airlines conducting themselves. They kept their own rosters, databases of known shippers, and now the TSA handled that program. So that meant that airlines no longer got to inspect their shippers, TSA did that. They maintain a database of who was and who was not a known shipper, and also the TSA conducted random screenings. So basically that was out of the hands of the airlines and now in the hands of the federal government. Also, there was new methods to identify like what constitutes high-risk cargo, and there was required security threat assessments for those who have unescorted access to air cargo. That'll be touched on later in the CCSP, or the Certified Cargo Screening Program. But basically the takeaway there is that if anyone has unescorted access to cargo, they have to have a security evaluation done on them. And even existing employees have to routinely have that evaluation reaccomplished. So just because you passed your first security evaluation, you get hired by a freight forwarder or any other part of the logistics supply chain that eventually leads to air cargo, it doesn't mean that you're good one and done. You have to accomplish that once every few years. All right, so as we can see, ATSA 2001 has a lot of provisions, and each one of these provisions represents a monumental change, just a sweeping change, a big systemic change. So how do they enforce all of these new changes? Well, the next two slides are going to cover that. The first part is you have to have people to enforce regulations. Just how it is. So TSA established what was called Cargo Transportation Security Inspectors, or TSI-C. Now these individuals have their primary roles listed on the slide here. The first, they conduct compliance inspections. So they're going to ensure that all cargo that's being prepared and screened for air cargo meets the standards necessary to keep people safe. The next is they perform investigations. So anytime there is a breach of security or a mishap, these would be the people that are going to investigate what happened, where the hole in the system was. Also, they're responsible for testing air carriers and indirect air carriers. But one that you may be less familiar with is educational outreach. That's right. So what that means is whenever there's a new regulation or whenever people fail to comply with regulations, they help people get into compliance. And this is a very necessary part of their job. After all, they want people to continue shipping things. You want the supply chain to keep moving. And the best way to do that is to ensure people are being compliant and teach them how to be compliant. So educational outreach is actually a really important part of what they do. They don't just inspect and fail people. Foreign inspectors, that's another critical component. As we remember, one of the key missions of ATSA is that all cargo that is inbound to the United States on passenger aircraft is meeting a similar security standard. So foreign inspectors ensure that that is happening outside of our borders. Now, let's watch a clip from the TSA on the cargo transportation security inspectors.
Transportation security inspectors Transportation security inspectors conduct inspections, assessments, and investigations of airlines. We determine how well airlines comply with rules governing aviation operations, as well as identifying areas of improvement. Yeah, go ahead, take a look and make sure that everything gets logged. My duties can take me to any number of cargo handling areas. That's more than 1,700 acres of cargo handling space. I grew up in the TSA. I learned from the very beginning aspects of the checkpoint till now as an inspector. In a typical day, I may be tasked with identifying security threats, responding to security violations, or addressing industry questions and concerns about regulations to more than 1,000 cargo companies. Identify it, that it's been checked. My father passed away in February 26, 1993 in the World Trade Center bombing. So I was 10 years old at that time, and I got a real dose of what reality is and what our nation was going through. And now as an adult, what can I do to protect my country?
Yeah, what is that?
I give that perspective because it built me into being someone that takes this seriously and takes our programs, our requirements to heart. And my part, my wanting to do something for our nation, to try to be at least that one little piece that's going to make our layers of security as effective as it can possibly be. My name is Yvette Mercado-Ream. I'm a Transportation Security Inspector out of John F. Kennedy International Airport, Queens, New York.
Alright, so as you can see, there's lots of dedicated individuals, over 500 out in the system, that are inspecting cargo, that are fulfilling these primary roles that we've talked about. But there's also another key component to enforcing these new regulations. Dogs, that's right, the National Canine Program. So, we have working dogs that are assisting with these cargo inspectors to make sure that everyone is compliant and keeping everyone safe. Let's go ahead and watch a video about the training of these dogs.
Don't be fooled by her playful demeanor. This pup is highly trained at sniffing out explosives.
Good girl.
She's just one of hundreds of dogs who have been trained at the TSA's Canine Training Center. Located in San Antonio, Texas, the Canine Program trains dogs for TSA and state and local law enforcement teams to help protect the nation's transportation systems. Generally, canine handlers undergo a 10-week training course, while canine handlers who focus on passenger screening undergo a 12-week training course. The training program replicates real-world environments that allow dogs to get accustomed to working at a range of locations. Some of these training areas include dormitories, passenger terminals, aircraft, and cargo areas. Everyone needs a little motivation, including our four-legged friends. It is not the search for explosives that is the motivator, it's the reward that drives them.
This is the ultimate game for these dogs, hide and seek. When we condition these dogs to find explosive odors, we pair odor with a reward. So the dog's not really saying, hey, I'm going around looking for explosives. The dog's saying, I'm going around looking for my reward.
The training revolves around four key elements. The canine's ability to recognize explosive odors. The handler's ability to interpret the dog's change of behavior. The handler's ability to conduct logical and systematic searches. And the team's ability to locate the explosive's odor source.
So you notice the dog is trying to get to it. His job is that I gotta get as close as I can. It's here, it's right here. It's actually in that box. I got odor, I got to get to it. And so that's why the dog jumped up in there and he stuck his nose under there and said, hey, it's right here.
Currently, there are nearly 1,000 canine teams deployed nationwide. These teams are a highly mobile and extremely efficient explosives detection tool used to deter and detect threats, making them not only man's best friend, but one of man's most effective resource in combating terrorism.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting. So we have the canines that sniff out explosives. That's how they're trained. I actually never knew that it was more of like a goal-driven task. I don't have much experience with animals, so yeah, I didn't know it was a goal-driven task. So that was pretty fascinating to me. I've only met a working dog once in my life, and I can honestly say it was the most intelligent animal I think I've ever interacted with. But let's go ahead and look at the operations aspects of these. So that was the training. Here's the operational aspect of these dogs.
Most airline passengers may not realize it, but they're not the only precious cargo a plane is carrying. Tons of valuable cargo fly in the belly of commercial aircraft every day. And to ensure that those planes fly safe, 100% of that cargo is screened for explosives.
The 100% of the cargo that goes on board a passenger aircraft is screened one form or another. Some of it may be passenger screening, canine screening, some of it may be ETD screening, that type of thing.
Canine cargo screening involves the use of explosive detection canines who are paired with transportation security inspectors. This team screens cargo inside huge cargo facilities before the pallets are loaded onto aircraft.
Typically it starts with, in the mornings, I'll feed her, get her ready for work, we'll commute to work, and then we pull our training aids, set up an exercise, run her through her paces and see how she's doing, and then we'll go out and screen freight, make sure there's no explosives in the freight at all before it gets sent onto passenger aircraft.
The inspectors and their highly trained dogs also screen items on the tarmac and in airport terminals.
They are not pets. They're an employee. They're working. The handlers does take them home at night. The handler does care for them, but they're not a pet.
The canines are one layer of security that TSA uses to screen that freight to make sure
Don't
it's
be
safe.
fooled by her playful
transport.
demeanor. This pup is highly trained at sniffing out
Most airline
explosives.
passengers.
All right, and there we have it. So that is the implementation of these
She's
dogs
just
team.
one of hundreds of dogs
I've,
who have been
again,
trained
learned
at the
something that I never
TSA's
did. I
Canine
never
Training
knew
Center.
that they actually take the dogs
Located
home
in San
with
Antonio,
them. So I guess
Texas,
where else
the
would they
Canine
live?
program trains dogs
So you
for
can see there's
TSA
this
and
partnership.
state
They
and
go through a
local law
rigorous training
enforcement
process.
teams
These
to
dogs
help
are
protect the
implemented, and they
nation's
complement the
transportation
cargo
systems.
security inspectors pretty
Generally,
well.
canine handlers undergo a 10-week training course, while canine handlers who focus on passenger screening undergo a 12-week training course. The training program replicates real-world environments that allow dogs to get accustomed to working at a range of locations. Some of these training areas include dormitories, passenger terminals, aircrafts, and cargo areas. Everyone needs a little motivation, including our four-legged friends. It is not the search for explosives that is the motivator. It's the reward that drives them.
This is the ultimate game for these dogs, hide and seek. When we condition these dogs to find explosive odors, we pair odor with a reward. So the dog's not really saying, hey, I'm going around looking for explosives. The dog's saying, I'm going around looking for my reward.
The training revolves around 4 key elements: the canine's ability to recognize explosive odors, the handler's ability to interpret the dog's change of behavior, the handler's ability to conduct logical and systematic searches, and the team's ability to locate the explosive.
All right, and now we are at the third and final part of this lecture. So if you feel like you need to stand up and take a break, this would be a good point to do that. Like I said before, it's important that you just kind of get up and walk around from time to time. So when you're ready, we'll start back with the Certified Cargo Screening Program, or CCSP. All right, So, Certified Cargo Screening Program, CCSP. This is what we were talking about. This is what that gentleman and the second dog video was talking about. 100% of all cargo on passenger aircraft had to be screened by August 2010. That is what was required of ATSA 2001, was 100%. So that in itself, when it was released, was probably one of the biggest logistical challenges. So a lot of those policies was kind of their strategy of how they were going to get there. Obviously, we saw the more who was going to do that with the dogs and the inspectors, but also they want to attack it in a two-step approach. And we've already seen kind of the divisions here. Maybe you can sort out what the divisions are on your own. But the first one was domestic screening. So that means any air cargo departing from a U.S. airport inside of a passenger aircraft would be screened. And then 2, inbound air cargo screening. So that means that somehow we had to screen all cargo abroad or ensure that all the cargo abroad underwent a very similar process to what the TSA mandates here before it arrives in the United States. So how did they get that done? So we already addressed this earlier, but potential and existing employees had to be evaluated for security risk. This is all the domestic screening strategies and policies they implemented. And that means that even if you were a current employee when this policy took place, or if you're a current employee after this policy took place, then you had to be routinely reviewed. So you're constantly being evaluated for your security risk, and before you're allowed to have unescorted access to air cargo, you're evaluated for your security risk. Next, they had to prevent unauthorized access to cargo facilities. This included the use of physical barriers, so in every aspect is, could somebody drive up to your air cargo yard? So that is to say, like, let's say you had pallets to be shipped out, could somebody walk up to them? If not, what physical barriers are you putting in place? This also included not only where it's stored, but places where they screened air cargo or prepared. There had to be these layers of security so no one who was not supposed to be there was not there. Also, very important, and I've been on this end myself, is maintaining the chain of custody. So, once a piece of air cargo has been prepared, screened, stored, it is secure. That means that every time that piece of cargo transitions from one plane to the next, from one cargo yard to the next, from one carrier to the next, there has to be a paper trail to make sure that that cargo has been in someone's custody, that it has remained secure. And losing paperwork on cargo can be a big headache. So maintaining the chain of custody is vital, not only to keep smooth operations, but to keep that cargo secure. And this is pretty reassuring. By August 2010, 10 years ago, they reported 100%. So the TSA met their domestic screening goal. Now, let's talk about the CCSP inbound cargo. The National Cargo Screening Program was established to address this. This is going based off of what we've talked about already, but this is inspectors abroad would assess foreign security measures. So they would go to airports abroad all over the world and see what they were doing to screen incoming cargo or cargo that was to be shipped on passenger aircraft inbound for the United States. If they thought that the security measures were equal to or better than what the United States had implemented, they established a recognition agreement. That's basically saying, we don't have to have a TSA inspector here because your process is rigorous enough that we trust anything coming from you. And that's what that recognition agreement basically means. Here's the figure they have in the book that kind of breaks down this process even more. Is like, let's say you have a shipping or manufacturer. So this could be a factory anywhere in the world. It could be mom and pop shop, sending boutique goods. There's two different routes you can take right off the bat. One, you can go to what's called a consolidation facility. So let's say you're selling things off Etsy and you're shipping it all over the world, right? You're obviously going to take it to like a UPS, which is already its own air carrier, or you're going to take it to like a shipping broker if you're maybe like a farmer or something. And they're going to consolidate that for you with a bunch of other stuff. It's more efficient to do it that way than you trying to ship all your small packages by yourself, right? So those consolidation facilities take custody of that package, they inspect it, they prepare it, and then they move it on to a sorting center by the air carrier. Alternatively, let's say you're a very large manufacturer, like say you're a 3M plant in China, or yeah, I think that's a pretty good example. Let's say you're a 3M plant in China, then you may have your own logistics supply chain, and you just send it directly to the air carrier where you have already packaged it, you've already prepared it in compliance with, and then it goes inbound to the United States after the air carrier has gone through their inspections. Did the TSA meet the Certified Cargo Screening Program's inbound cargo goal? It's questionable, basically. And let's talk about why. So, the reason why it's questionable whether the Certified Cargo Screening Program met its 100% goal is because of the 2010 air cargo plot. So what this basically was, as you can see from the BBC article at the side of the slide there, it was an attempted plot to send explosives to synagogues in Chicago. Luckily, for numerous reasons, this plan was foiled. But essentially what happened was they had small yet complex bombs. They basically put plastic explosives inside of toner cartridges and put those inside of printers and then shipped them from Yemen to synagogues in Chicago. Fortunately, Saudi Arabian intelligence tipped off US and German intelligence, one because these packages were inbound to Chicago, and one of the planes was due to make an en route stop in Bonn, Germany. So they supplied the US and German intelligence with tracking numbers and the destinations of these packages. On the note of the destinations, even if they had made it to their intended targets, they wouldn't have been synagogues. They actually determined that they had gotten the addresses online, but the buildings they were sending them to were no longer synagogues. So I guess good thing we never had to find out, but even if they were successful, they wouldn't have hit their intended target. So these bombs were intercepted in Dubai and London. So the first one left Yemen, Sana'a International, and landed in Dubai, and it was intercepted there. The other one took off, landed in Germany, but then it was put on another plane to London. So they took it off the plane in London, and both bombs were defused. So crisis averted, basically because the intelligence community found it, tracked it, resolved it. So good thing that never played out. So this is why we can't really say whether or not that all inbound cargo was screened prior to August 2010, because this happened in literally November 2010. So just, a couple months after we were supposed to meet this goal, we had this plot where plastic explosives are flying to Chicago. So what do we do in response to this? Obviously, this represents a failure somewhere. And as I mentioned earlier, anytime there's an incident in aviation, there's an investigation, there are underlying causes, and there's someone to blame. So what do we do when we found out that packages out of Yemen had plastics explosives inbound for Chicago? We instituted new screening requirements. That's kind of a go-to move, is increase screening requirements. So new screening requirements on high-risk shipments. They also prohibited air cargo originating from Somalia and Yemen. And then the National Cargo Security Program was reevaluated, looking for what happened, why this went wrong. I know one of the biggest things they addressed was people don't typically get their office supplies from Yemen, so that should have been a red flag, and somehow that was missed. So they established an International Trusted Shipper Program, which is essentially that recognition agreement that we've been talking about, very similar to the known shipper, but it's just a new, beefier program, the International Trusted Shipper Program. What they also did to address this was launch the pilot program for the Air Cargo Advanced Screening, or ACAS program. This was a joint effort by both the TSA and Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP. And what this did was it gave air carriers the ability to send and receive advanced security filing data, and it gave TSA and Customs and Border Patrol the ability to receive that filing data. And what did that do for them? It basically allowed them to screen and flag high-risk cargo. However, implementing this program was a bit of a challenge, and there's 3 big reasons why, and we'll dig deeper into each one. The first challenge was the logistics challenge. So, anytime you add a new process or you change a process, you're going to have disruptions to operations. You also had an increase in screening times. So, the disruption to operations and the screening times, this all led to higher costs. You know, it's an old adage in business, time is money. Also, a big issue with the logistics was there was a lack of TSA-approved technologies. So the TSA maintained a list of approved screening technologies for air cargo, and the list just was not that comprehensive, and they were not approving new technologies very regularly. So there was a shortage of these technologies, there wasn't very many to begin with, and that led to the other 3, disruption to operations, screening times, and higher costs. Another big challenge faced with implementing this ACAS program was data. That's right. So essentially they're relying on self-reported data from air carriers. And how to go about verifying that data was a bit of a challenge at first. So they weren't really sure how they were going to go about that. Also, when they received data from all cargo carriers, they didn't really have anything to compare it to. So they hadn't really required all cargo carriers to adhere to the same regulations. And so there was less data to compare it to. This was challenging to find out what should be flagged as high risk. Also, there was just the evaluation portion of it. And this was doing National Cargo Screening Program assessments and willingness of host countries to cooperate. That was a challenge, is getting people on board with a new screening program. But luckily they overcame these challenges because they reported 100% on December 3rd, 2012. So that concludes our talk about air cargo today. So in conclusion, what do we talk about? In regards to air cargo, we saw our first significant action was a result of the Gore Commission in 1996. So this largely was a product of the TWA Flight 800, which exploded 12 minutes after takeoff. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. There was also a series of air tragedies that happened before that. We also talked about ValueJet 592. So that all led to the known shipper program, the program where air carriers have to send someone to inspect the facility of who they're receiving cargo from. They got verified as these known carriers, and those known carriers were able to give cargo to the air carriers. Also, ATSA 2001. So this was a product of our response to 9/11. How do we make things more secure? The main goals of that, of course, was preventing bombs from getting on passenger aircraft and preventing all cargo airlines from being hijacked and weaponized. We talked about the rolling changes that happen, these big systematic changes. In order to cope with those large changes, they had to create a new job, cargo transportation security inspectors, and also implemented the National Canine Program to get dogs out there sniffing cargo. As a part of ATSA 2001, we had the Certified Cargo Screening Program. This was the goal to have 100% of all cargo screened prior to August 2010. Domestically, they met this goal, right? They implemented the changes we talked about, and they met the goal. But the inbound cargo one, we're not really sure if they really met it or not, because we had the 2010 air cargo plot to send plastics explosives inside of toner cartridges to the United States. So, but they did report 100% compliance as of December 3rd, 2012. So there we have it. We have the Gore Commission, the Known Shipper Program. We talked about all the changes in ATSA, and then we had the Certified Cargo Screening Program. Domestically, 100% of all air cargo has been screened since August 2010, and we can for sure know that 100% has been screened as of December 3rd, 2012 for all inbound cargo to the United States.